Welcome back to the Garden with Joe and Holly radio show. Happy to have you along. Miss any of those coupon codes or want to see all of our sponsors that support the program and allow us to be on your radio station? You can do that by going to our parent website, thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com, and under the Money tab is the coupon codes, and under the Season 9 tab is past shows and all the sponsors.
Well, my goodness, how about that intro music? It gets me in the mood to plant tomatoes.
Oh, is that what it takes? Okay.
I don't know. Anyway, we're going to talk about growing tomatoes in the ground.
Now, this is after you've bought them or started them or whatever. This is whenever you've hardened them off and it's time to put them in the ground.
All right, so you want to think of
well, I guess let's start with hardening them off.
Okay.
Let's explain that because people do not understand that terminology.
You love talking about hardening off the tomatoes because I didn't grow up with seedlings, right. So you can talk about
So hardening off is a process of acclimating the seedling, whether it's tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, anything you started indoors and you're transitioning outside in a time frame in which the plant gets more and more adapted to the environment in which it's in from where it was. So you take your tomato flat of seedlings and you take them outside on a warm day, let's say 65, 70 degree day, light winds, and put them in a partial shade area where it's, what is it called? Speckled sunlight? Is that the term? Speckled sunlight for about an hour or two. Bring them back in. Now this is going to be a challenge if you work during the day and you don't have access to that availability. So this is a premise. You can adapt it however it works for you. Then you kind of bring them out. You can do that over, that first day, 2 or 3 hours in that partial shade. And then the next day you bring them out for a little bit longer and put them a little bit more in the sunlight. Same thing over and over for the third, fourth, fifth day. And by the sixth or seventh day, you're leaving them out all day in the seed tray, hydrated, in full sun, and overnight. And then you can put them in the ground. Also, the key about putting them in the ground, you can have your plants hardened off. And it can be warm all that week, 60, 70 degree days, very nice. But that ground, if you take your socks off and walk barefoot on the ground, if it still feels chilly to your feet, those plants are not going to be happy. They can be okay at 50 degrees, but they don't like it. You're really looking at 55, 60 degrees at root zone. How do you find the root zone? Or how do you find the temperature at root zone? You use a digital meat thermometer and probe it down 3 or 4 inches safely, and you're going to get some mixed readings. But when you get between that 55 and 65 range, and there's nothing wrong with waiting to plant these tomatoes.
No, so you might hear like a coworker or neighbor.
Guess what I did this week? I put 400 tomatoes in the ground.
Yeah, and you might be like, oh my goodness, I'm behind. Your coworker, neighbor, whoever
may not know what he's doing.
May not know what they're doing, and exactly. And rushing the process, you hear all the time. Trust the process.
Saw it on the TV. I don't know why I sound like an old guy.
Trust the process. So trusting the process means like planting your tomatoes at the right temperature. Because Joy and I did this once. We started a week early or something, or 2 weeks early, and then there was a cold snap, and the tomatoes. I mean, they survived, but
they weren't happy.
They were not happy. And we thought we were going to have to replant everything. So it's better to wait a week and plant them when it's proper.
And what is the saying? I'd rather plant my tomatoes the first time than the second time when my neighbor plants his the first time.
Yeah, right.
And you can, when we talked about the hardening off, if you have bought your tomatoes from a garden center, an independent garden center, big box store, and they are outside, you do not have to go through the hardening off process. That has already been done for you. You can literally take them, drive them home, and put them in the ground, and they're good to go.
Now, if you buy them and bring them inside for some reason.
Correct.
And then you leave them inside for like a week or whatever, then you have to go back to hardening them off. But if you buy them like, say, Friday evening, and then you're gonna plant them Saturday, just leave them outside. Yeah.
Now, planting them in the ground, there's a couple of methods in which you can plant them. You can dig them deep because and bury the stem about 3/4 of the way up and leave the top quarter of the stem exposed, or that it's because all the hairs on the stem has the potential of creating more roots. All the hairs can be roots. You can also do the trench method, which if you cannot dig deep, if you've got a shallow raised bed or only got so much good topsoil before you hit clay, you can actually dig a trench and lay that tomato plant on its side and plant it that way, and then bend the top of the tip up so you have 2 or 3 inches above the ground, and then everything else is buried. Now, that can be a challenge because plants are sensitive and you can actually snap the plant in half. So you can take your seedlings, and if you've got them in individual cups or you're pulling them out of seed tray, lay them flat in the area in which you're going to do the trench method for about 2 hours. It's okay if they get a little dry. They're going to kind of bend upwards slightly, so you're going to get a little curve naturally into them, and then you can plant them. Now, the other thing is, what do you put in the hole at the time of planting? Some people put nothing. Growing up on the farm, we always did a triple 10, and that was it. Mm-hmm. Now we've seen, because of the technology of social media and the internet, which is on computers now, that people will put everything that they can imagine in the hole at the time of planting. Powdered milk, crushed eggshells, Tums, got to have calcium, can't have blossom end rot. And I go through this, and we go through this each year, that typically you do not have a calcium deficiency. There may be a few areas, in a soil test from soilsavvy.com or ThinkSoil or GrowSmart.com will solve that issue. But putting powdered milk or crushed eggshells or Tums does not fix the problem. If you're going to use Tums, you better use 80 of them, because we had Robert Pervera on last year, the garden mythbuster. You need 80 Tums in order to sufficiently supply the tomato with the adequate amount of calcium, assuming you have low calcium in your soil. Blossom end rot, Holly, is...
It's a physiological problem. And so, as Joe had mentioned, is making sure your plants are consistently being watered. So a lot of people, it's a lack of access for available to the plant of calcium. Yeah. So a lot of this happens to a lot of people because you plant your tomatoes, and then usually like it rains a few times within the next couple of weeks, and you don't think about watering them, and then all of a sudden it gets kind of not droughty, but it doesn't rain as much.
The soil's not moist like a sponge.
Right. And you're like, okay, and then you get your first set of tomatoes, and they have blossom end rot, which basically, if you look at the bottom, not the stem side, but the blossom side of the tomato, and it's like usually black or dark brown, and that's blossom end rot. And so then,
if you see that as they're developing and they're green, pull them off the plant, because there's no sense of having more energy dumped into the things that you can't use.
Yeah, and the tomatoes will, then the plant will produce more. But then what happens is that people are like, oh, add this or this or this, and then water it in. And it's not what you're adding, it's watering it in. And that calcium is locked up in the soil because it's not wet like a sponge, as Joey says. And once you water, it releases those nutrients, especially the calcium, back into the plant and takes care of that blossom end rot problem.
So now, once we've got it in the ground, how do we support it? You've got to support your tomatoes. 50% of your tomato harvest will be lost if you do not cage or support your tomatoes in some form or fashion. You can use a big, fancy, expensive tomato cage. You can use the cheap little tomato cages with T-post or some type of post in order to support them. You can use a method called the Florida weave, which is a strip, let's say you got 8 tomatoes in a row. You've got a big steel T-post on one end and another T-post, a thick metal fence post on the other, and you run strings back and forth like a wrestling ring, and then the plants will grow. You'll have to assist them, but they'll grow up through those strings, and they can hang on that, and that acts as a cage.
Now, you want to do two layers or whatever you want to call it.
2 strings both ways. Some people will do one. We do a 2, so there's 1 on each side. So when you spread them apart, the plant you can get the leaves up over those strings, and the plant can hang on it much easier with 2 strings on each 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, and 4 foot height. And it works very well. We use an agricultural twine, the type that they use, that plastic twine that they use to wrap the big round bales in the fields with. We get 20,000 feet for like $20, and we'll never use it up. And it's orange. That's just the color it is.
So the thing is that it's not fancy garden magazine aesthetic. It does its job. It's not like you're going to win design awards for this look, but it does a really good job. It's cheap. So if you want something where you're like, no, I want to look prettier, those are your options. But this is something that works really well, and it's not a lot of things that you have to buy or invest in or gather, and it's items that you may already have. So that's what's helpful about the Florida Weave. And so that's the tomato support. You could also get those tomato cages that they sell at pretty much every hardware store, garden store, big box store, wherever you have been around here. It's really popular to see ones that are colored for like sports teams. Otherwise, you can find them online. But again, I've seen them pretty much at every garden center, etc.
As the plant grows, you want to trim off the lower 6 to 8 inches of the limbs and leaves in order to keep soil splash up from hitting the leaves, which can work and cause early blight on your tomatoes.
Yeah, so early blight is something that lives in the soil. There's good and bad things that live in our soil. It's in everybody's soil. It doesn't matter, and early blight is one of them. And so when you trim the lower portion of leaves, it helps prevent that splash up getting onto the plant, where the early blight would exist. So when you trim them and you keep them trimmed, it helps prevent that. And obviously, like watering near the base of the plant, but
mulch.
If it rains, mulch. If it rains, it's not like the rain knows to just only water near the base of the plant. So mulch helps with that as well. And then also whole grain cornmeal.
Yellow whole grain cornmeal, it's got to be yellow, has a beneficial bacteria in it called trichoderma, which fights the bad bacteria, which is the early blight in your soil.
So you want to make sure that it's whole grain, and so it's going to be a little bit more expensive than the not whole grain, the more refined grain, I guess. But they sell it pretty much everywhere. If you can't find it, you can always look online or like an organic food store. But you want to make sure it's yellow whole grain.
A handful at the base of the plant after it's been put in the ground, and then you can put your mulch on top of it, water it, and you're good to go. And you will be amazed of how much this reduces the early blight that your plants are susceptible to. Now, we don't know if it works on like potatoes or peppers, but tomatoes, it works incredibly well. And we've been doing it for 11 years now with a very good success. Prior to finding this out from Bob Webster, a master gardener and garden radio host back years ago in Texas, I don't know if he still has a show down there or not, we would have a plant by the end of the season that was just dead with fruit hanging off of it. Now we have very lush plants that continue to produce fruit up to the time of frost. So it works very, very well. Well, Holly, what also you should be preparing for is the warm weather that soon will be with us, and that will be meaning that the grubs and beetles will also be there.
Yeah, spring is pretty much here, and it's time to start thinking about controlling beetles, grubs, etc. in your yard. People are always talking about those Japanese beetles, and they're not too far away.
Grub Gone can be applied directly to your turf, ornamentals, or just irrigate it right in the ground to lessen the chance of the impact that those beetles will have on your yard this summer. Easy to apply. Use a commercial spreader, or again, just irrigate it right in the soil. Specifically designed to target grubs and beetle invaders without harming beneficial insects such as bees, butterflies, and ladybugs.
And it's the only non-chemical that works. You can find out more at phyllumbioproducts.com. That's PHYLLOM bioproducts.com.